Hello everyone! Welcome to the 8th episode of the Knitting Jungle podcast. My name is Sarah, in case you're new here, and this is a podcast where I primarily talk about knitting, and sometimes I'll throw in some crochet and sewing. There won't be any crochet or sewing in today's episode, however. This episode is going to be pretty heavy in the finished objects department. I've got 5 finished objects and pretty much 0 whips. But I do have some yarn and some plans, which I will include at the very end of the episode in case you're interested. As always, I will include links to all the yarn and patterns that I'm talking about below in the description box. And I do have a link to my Instagram and Ravelry pages in case you're interested in that as well. So here in New England, I'm in Massachusetts, we're finally getting some nice fall weather, which means the mornings are a little bit chilly and I can finally start wearing all the sweaters I've made over the summer and late spring. I'm even wearing some slippers today, so it's a bit sad the summer's over, but I am glad to finally wear everything I've been working on for the past couple of months. As for what I'm wearing, this is one of my finished objects, and I will talk about that second, actually. The first finished object I'm going to talk about today is a very long-term whip, so I'm very happy that this is now a finished object. You might have even seen this in my first couple of episodes and maybe sprinkled here and there, because I've been working on this for about 4 or 5 months. But anyways, this is the Loge sweater by Jarbo. It's a free knitting pattern, so I will be talking freely about how I made it, which is always great. I made this, did I say this already? I made it for my husband, and I think maybe I can steal it too. It definitely fits me, a bit oversized, but who doesn't love a good oversized sweater in fall and winter? So this is a beautiful kind of Gansey inspired pattern. So there's a ton of texture going on just with knits and purls. I'll insert some clips of my husband wearing it and maybe some other footage where you can see the pattern up close there. I made the 5th size. My husband has a 41 or 42 inch chest, and this has a lot of positive ease on him. So, and he's about 5'10". And it's basically just a giant tube box with no shaping whatsoever the entire way down after you finish the yoke portion. And then you've got some beautiful little diamond pearl bumps here. One thing I will note about this pattern you want to maybe watch out for is that the chart for the diamonds might not line up in the center. I saw some reviews on Ravelry say that their diamonds were not lining up in the center, so just make sure that yours do. So here's the chart for the diamonds. You can see here. So after you finish the diamonds, you knit 2 little purl rows here, and then this section here is you just repeat the first 2 rows here for maybe like 26 rows, and that creates these columns here. If you can see, yeah, there you go. Then after the columns you do some, I think, seed or moss stitch, and that is bordered by 2 rows of purl bumps. And then you work another section of the diamonds and another section of these little columns, and then you do the ribbing, and then you're all done. And what did I do here? I just did 1 by 1 ribbing, which normally I don't like to do because it doesn't look good. When I do it, it usually looks really uneven and sloppy. But in this yarn, I guess it looks good, or it blocked out. Either way, it worked out. And I picked up stitches for the neck and also did 1 by 1 ribbing there. So let's talk a little bit about the construction of the sweater. I think it's a pretty standard way of doing sweaters. I've done one other sweater in this way before. So what you do is you start in the back and you work the back yoke all the way down, I think until maybe about here. So you do a whole set of diamonds and maybe halfway down to these columns. And then you just put those stitches on hold and you pick up stitches along the shoulder ridge on the left and right side. And then you knit the left front and the right front until you get to this section where you cast on stitches at the center front, maybe like 25 or 30 stitches. And then you knit the whole front panel by itself until same as the back. So you do an entire section of the diamond chart and then all about halfway down these columns, and then you join in the round and knit all the way down to however long you want your sweater, and there's no shaping at all, so that part was pretty easy. So for the sleeves, you pick up stitches here. It's a nice drop sleeve, which is always nice. It makes it seem like you're knitting shorter sleeves because you already have the head start of this section, which I really like. So you pick up stitches here and you knit, you knit stockinette for several centimeters and then work one chart of the diamonds, then 2 rows of the purl bumps, and then these columns, another set of diamonds, and then stockinette all the way until you reach the hem, and you're done. There are some decreases along the sleeve. I think every 8 rows you do decrease 2 stitches, and that is in the underarm part of the sleeve. It's pretty invisible. I can't see, and I wouldn't care if you can see that anyways. So yeah, that's a pretty easy, straightforward sweater. I think it's pretty beginner friendly if you want something that's not just a plain stockinette sweater. I really like the texture. It just looks so cozy. Let me talk a little bit about the yarn. So this is the yarn I used. This is Knit Rennie Super Soft Lamb's Wool, and they call this greasy cone, and that means it has all the spinning oils still in there. It would be great for machine knitting also, by the way. Anyways, I held this double. It's pretty thin, probably less than a maybe it's a fingering weight. I think it's a fingering weight. And then held double, it's supposed to be a worsted weight, which is what the pattern recommends. So yep, I held this double, and this, I still have a lot of this cone. This came in 850 gram cone. They also sell it in 500 grams. And this sweater, I just weighed it. It was 490 grams. So you could probably, if you wanted to make a similar size to this, you could just get one of the 500 gram cones and you should be all set. But you might be cutting it a little close. But anyways, this cone was only 36 bucks, which I think is a great deal for an entire adult size sweater. The shipping was nearly as expensive as the cone, but still overall I think it was a great deal for a sweater's quantity of very high quality lamb's wool, in my opinion. This is the color Olive Grove 1057. So after I finish this, since it is considered a greasy cone with all the spinning oils in there, I soaked this in a bathtub with just regular laundry detergent, and I let that sit overnight. And when I woke up in the morning, the water was super cloudy, and I took that to mean that all the oils had fallen off and gone into the water. And when this yarn has a very strong smell, by the way. You probably want to knit with it in a ventilated area, maybe wear gloves if you're sensitive to lanolin or whatever oils they've used in there. I didn't do any of that though, and I was okay, but I'm not sure that is how you are recommended to knit with this. Just a disclaimer there. Anyways, after I did the preliminary soak with the regular laundry detergent, I smelled it and it didn't smell at all anymore. It just smelled like regular nice sheep. So I assumed all the spinning oils had disappeared, and I did a second soak in Eucalan wool wash stuff. The stuff you don't have to wash out, you just let it soak. So after the second soak, it was all good to go. And it smells beautifully sheepy, and I think all the spinning oils are out and we're good to go. So that's all I have to say about the Loge sweater, and I'm very happy with it. My husband already wore it, so I think he likes it. He's not sensitive to rustic woolly wools, So hopefully he'll wear it a few more times this fall and winter. Okay, for my next finished object, this is what I'm wearing. This is the Efterar number 2. I think that means autumn. And this pattern is by Hillesvag, and it just came out a few weeks ago, and I ordered the yarn and cast it on immediately. I think the pictures of the model look so good, and I was immediately influenced to get the yarn and start the project. And this is the thickest sweater I've ever made. I only started making sweaters last winter, but still, I am so happy with how this turned out. Not only is it super soft and warm, and I love this abstract design, but this only took me 7 or 8 days, I think, because it was knit on 6mm needles, which is so crazy. I highly recommend making a giant chunky sweater if you just want that immediate gratification. Like if you had just been doing a fingering weight sweater or something and you just finished that and you wanted something that would be a lot less time consuming. That's exactly what I did after I finished my husband's sweater. I thought this is going to be perfect, a nice chunky project to see immediate results. It won't take me too long, and that's exactly what I got with this pattern. So the designer of this pattern is named Augustinis or Augustinis. So it's Augustinis for Hillesvag. And this pattern, let me grab the yarn. So the yarn for this project is knit with Hillesvag Luna, and this is a lamb's wool. Oh, 2 lamb's wool projects this time. That's kind of funny. I'm not sure, but this might be a relatively new yarn for this company. So Hillesvag is a Norwegian yarn company. I think it's been, established in 1898. And this yarn is made with 100% Norwegian white sheep. I guess that's just the type of sheep. And the pattern asks you to also hold this yarn double with a silk mohair. I think they recommend maybe Isair, but I didn't want to buy that much Isair, so I went with the Drops Kid Silk, which is a little cheaper. This is a very soft, squishy yarn. Much softer than the Knit Rennie, even though it's called super soft lamb's wool. I wouldn't really call it soft. It's not itchy, but this is really soft. And this ecru color is beautiful. I don't know if you can tell, but it's kind of a creamy warm white as opposed to a cool white. And I think warm tones look a lot better on me than a cool tone. And then for the kid silk, I have an extra ball of this as well. I think it over recommended the mohair as well. This is color 56, and this is kind of a cool white, but paired together is perfectly fine in the finished sweater. And then here's the Luna lamb's wool in the ochre color. This is one of my favorite colors, especially for fall. It doesn't get any more fall than this. And this one they recommended you also hold together with the silk mohair. And this, I did get the Isair silk mohair for this because I've heard really good things and I only needed 2 balls of it. So I just decided to get it. This is color 63 and it's quite different than this ochre color. But I think in the finished object, it looks really beautiful. It's kind of like a pop of gold here. I think you can tell. So if you want an exact match, it's definitely not an exact match, but I really like that, that little bit of sparkle that it gives in there. I think that's pretty cool. So I also did a little test with the mohair because I have the cheapest mohair, the Drops Kid Silk, and then the Isair silk mohair. And just in case you're wondering, the Isair is quite a bit softer than the Kid Silk. Not that this is scratchy or anything, but this just feels, it just feels a little bit nicer to me, in my opinion. The Kid Silk also has very long little wispy guys coming off. And in the Isair, the wispy little things seem to be more contained within the strand, if that makes any sense. They're more within the strand instead of kind of going all over the place. I don't even think you can tell that, but when I was knitting with it, that's kind of how it seems. And so I did do a test. I wore some black leggings and I scrubbed these mohairs on my leggings because this one sheds a ton. So I was interested to see what happened with this. And it didn't shed at all. So it is triple the price, but if that's something, if shedding is a concern to you, then maybe that's something to consider. And also, just to complete the comparison, I've got some Knitting for Olive silk mohair here. So here's all three together. They're pretty much, they look the same to me, especially when you combine it with such a thick yarn. The effect is not noticeable in terms of softness. If you were to knit an entire sweater in just mohair, then, well, then you'd have to buy a lot of mohair, but then the softness might really make a difference, and maybe you would want to splurge on the Isayer. The Knitting for Olive, the price is somewhere in the middle, and in terms of shedding, I find this one sheds a little bit, but not nearly as much as the Kid Silk. It's more on par with the Isayer. The only other difference I see when I'm just holding these two together is that the Knitting for Olive, the silk thread portion is like ever so slightly thicker than the Isayer. So maybe, I guess that could affect your tension a little bit. And the Kid Silk is also on the thicker end, and I would say the Isayer has the thinnest strand here. But they're all pretty much, if you ask any non-knitter, they'd be like, what are you talking about? These are all exactly the same. So I'm just trying to micro-analyze this. Oh, one last thing about the yarn. I was a little skeptical about even adding the mohair to the lamb's wool because the lamb's wool itself was such a thick yarn. And I'm always skeptical, like, are they trying to just make me buy more yarn? But in this case, I think the mohair really did make a difference. If you look at the texture up close, it's really, really fuzzy. And even though it was such a thick yarn combined with such a thin mohair, the whole overall effect just looks really, really fuzzy, and the mohair really stands out. So I just wanted to mention that as well. So like I said before, I made the third size and it's very roomy. I have a 37-inch bust measurement for reference, and I think this has at least 10 inches of positive ease. And after you finish the yoke part, there's no shaping from like the armpit area all the way down. So it's quite a simple make in terms of Colorwork sweaters. There's no shaping in the sleeves either. So if you want to challenge yourself with a Colorwork project that's not too hard, just the yoke part is a little tricky with the increases and everything. But there's no shaping after the yoke. So maybe if you're looking to do your very first Colorwork project, you might want to try this, and it's going to go by really fast because of how thick the yarn is. So back to the yarn quantities. So not only did the pattern recommend too much of the Luna lamb's wool and the silk mohair yarn in the white color, I also barely broke into the ochre color. So the pattern told me I needed 2 skeins of ochre, so 200 grams. And I only broke into the second skein on the second sleeve right about here. So only a little bit of the second skein was used. So I have basically an entire full skein of the ochre brown yarn and the second ball of silk mohair. So that's just a little bit frustrating because now not only did I buy extra yarn, but now I have to try to use it. And I guess that's one downside to Colorwork, is that I've never been able to find a pattern where you can perfectly use up, or within reason, like use most of all the different colors that are in the pattern. You always wind up with some amount of leftover, and sometimes a ton of leftovers. And it's nice to have things in your stash, but I think it would be so nice to have a pattern that just perfectly used up every single color you had. Okay, so let me talk about the construction a little bit. As you see on the model, there is a beautiful turtleneck associated with this pattern that I had to omit because I hate turtlenecks, unfortunately. I just don't like that around my neck. And so what I did was I just started the pattern with the amount of stitches it had right after you finish the turtleneck. And then after I finished the entire sweater, I went back and I picked up the neckline stitches and I just did 2 or 3 rows of twisted rib, 1 by 1 ribbing. And then I did an I-cord bind off. And yeah, I really like how this sits. It's a pretty high neck, but it gives me plenty of room. I really like a wide open neck, so this is about as far closed up as I will allow my neck to be. And from there, I just followed the yoke pattern chart exactly. I think it's maybe 50 or 60 rows, and every size follows the same chart. You just repeat it more or less depending on your size. I really like this pattern because it's very abstract and it kind of gives me petroglyph vibes. So to me it kind of looks like ancient rock art that you find in the southwest deserty area of the US, and I just think that's really neat. The armholes are pretty low, which I like. Probably my real armpit's here, and there's probably 5 inches below that, so I think that's super comfortable. Some people I know don't like all this room, but I find the sweater, especially yoke sweaters, hang a lot better on my shoulders when the armhole depth starts very low. If it's too high like this, it starts to bunch up here. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it might be true for me. One thing I will say about having such an abstract pattern is that when you're doing the chart, it's really hard to read your work and see if you're doing it correctly or not. I had to check like every few stitches to make sure I didn't make a mistake because it was really hard to see what the pattern was going to be. And I actually made a lot of mistakes compared to some of my other colorwork projects because I just couldn't tell what was going on pretty much until I took a little break from my knitting and looked back and then discovered errors. So I did make a lot more errors than normal, and I think that's because it's such an abstract pattern. But in the end, I think I fixed all the problems and it turned out very well. After the yoke part, there's a very simple pattern repeat for the rest of the way down. And then there's a very long 7-inch rib down here. So this part is really easy. You can easily memorize this type of pattern, and it's not so boring as just plain blank stockinette, but it's not so hard that you're knitting with 2 colors every single row. For this section, you're only knitting with 2 colors 33% of the time. Another change I made was the ribbing. I don't like to do 1 by 1 ribbing. I think when I do it, it looks a little too sloppy. So I changed that out for twisted rib. And I did twisted rib for all the different hems. So both the sleeves and the bottom hem and the neckline area. If you also have problems having 1 by 1 ribbing look bad, like I do, and if you don't like the look of twisted rib, I could suggest that you use the reverse side of twisted rib, which looks exactly like 1 by 1 ribbing, but turns out a lot neater than actually doing 1 by 1 ribbing. I don't know if you can tell here. So how you would do this is on the right side of your work, you would do purl 1 through the back loop and then knit 1. And just do that to the end of the row. And then on the wrong side of your work, if you have a wrong side of your work, you would do knit 1 through the back loop and purl 1, if that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about color work and maybe a couple tips I can share with you. Now that I've done a few colorwork sweaters, I have certain things that I like to do, and it might be helpful in case you're a little intimidated to start colorwork yourself. So what I like to do in terms of floats is I like to catch my floats every 3 or 4 stitches. So if there's going to be a gap of more than 3 stitches, for example 4 stitches, I will catch a float on either the 2nd or 3rd stitch. Otherwise, I feel like the float becomes too long. So let's take a look at the inside of the sleeve, for example. You can see all the floats are pretty short, and here's probably the longest float. It's probably 3 stitches long, but it's not too bad as to you're not going to snag your finger in that or anything. Now, when I'm catching a float, I find it best to catch the float on the same color stitch as your float will be. So for example, if you have a float that's going to be brown, it's usually better to try to catch that float while you're knitting a brown stitch. And I find that if you do it that way, the brown float will blend in with the brown stitch, and it won't poke through and show or anything. So it's a really good way to hide that float. Another thing I like to do, especially if you need to catch floats on every single round, is to try to make sure you're not catching a float on the same exact stitch every round. That kind of creates a column of floats, and that becomes really visible on the right side of the work. So if you can stagger your floats, that would be the best thing to do. So how I like to knit my color work is I hold the background color in my right hand, so that would be knitting English style, and then I hold the accent color in my left hand, or continental style. And I learned to knit from a book when I was about 13, and the book had me learn English style, so that's how I knit. But when I started my first colorwork sweater a few months ago, I knew it was going to be best to try to have a different color in each hand. So I kind of taught myself how to knit continental style, and after about 40 hours of practice, I can say I'm pretty good or perfectly acceptable at continental knitting now, especially good enough for color work in that it's not annoying and it doesn't slow me down too much to knit color work now. But anyways, where I was going with that is, you know how you're supposed to always hold the dominant color in your left hand, so like the accent color in your left hand? Well, on some rows, you might find that the dominant or accent color is occurring much more frequently than the background color. There's a few times here where the rows have a lot more brown than white, like this one right here. And on those rows, I will actually switch the colors in my hands and go against the rules and put the background color in my left hand and the accent color in my right hand. And that's just because I'm faster at doing that. So the round will go faster if most of my knits are in the English style way of knitting, which I'm better at. And I find that in an entire pattern, I'm only doing that for maybe 3 or 4 rows, like every so often. And it doesn't seem to really affect the overall look of the pattern or the dominant colors. So that's just a little cheat thing that I do to make things go faster. Another thing I wanted to talk about is how to fix a mistake that you made a few rows back. Yikes! You don't have to panic unless the entire row is completely messed up. I actually made this mistake on one of the sleeves where these fleece stitches were like one off. Instead of being all nicely lined up, they were one off somehow. So I did do this technique to fix an entire row, but it wasn't every single stitch, it was just a couple of stitches fixed. So what I did was I went down to the row below my mistake and I picked up a leg of those 2 knit stitches I needed to fix. Well, the legs of the 2 stitches below the 2 stitches I needed to fix. And then I unraveled those 2 stitches all the way down until I reached the stitches the live stitches that my crochet hook was holding. Then I just reached back with my hook and picked up the correct color and kind of laddered my way all the way back up until the row I was currently on, and then just flick that little loop back on the needle. I don't know if all that made sense, but hopefully a teeny bit of that was helpful to some of you. So I think that's all I have to say about this sweater. I'm so happy with it. It's so soft and snuggly and oversized, and I can just see wearing this when I get sick inevitably this fall and winter and just snuggling up with this. And I was thinking about even putting maybe a little tissue pocket on the inside of the sleeve here because it's so wide. Surely I could store something in there. Okay, now we are moving on to another finished object, which was almost nearly done in my last episode. This is my Rundt I Dalen, which means around the valley, or in the valley, I think, in Norwegian. This is a beautiful Setesdal inspired pattern by Kristin Wiola. She's one of my favorite colorwork designers, and I have her book, which is in English. It's got about 12 colorwork sweaters. I highly recommend you check it out. I linked it down below if you're interested. So what we've got here is a sweater that I actually made entirely on the machine as kind of a giant risky experiment. So my knitting machine takes punch cards, and you can do color work with the punch cards, 2 colors at a time. So what I did was I took the book pattern and kind of converted it into a machine pattern, and I made my own punch cards. It's kind of like this. I don't want to give away the whole pattern, but I've got a few of these, I think 3 different ones for this pattern. And I started at the bottom here, and I did, oh no I didn't, yes I did. I started at the bottom. This ribbed hem I did by hand at the very end. So I started at the bottom and did all the color work with the punch cards, and as needed I switched out the punch cards for a different pattern depending on what was required, and I basically just made a giant rectangle, but then also did decreases when I got to the armpit. And my main problem with this is I didn't do these decreases well enough. I don't like how it fits. I think instead of decreasing every row, I think I should have decreased every other row, and it would have had a less steep angle. Or no, that would be steeper, the steeper angle. And then I think the sweater would sit a little bit more relaxed and a little bit lower. But that's okay. I wore this out to lunch yesterday. So if I can wear it out in public, then I think that's a win. So I knit a front panel and a back panel pretty much the exact same way. The back panel does have more mistakes though. See this line of white? I have no idea how that happened, which is a little bit frustrating with the knitting machine. Sometimes I have no idea what's going on or why it did something, but that's just part of the fun, part of the learning process. And all the mistakes I just put on the back side of my sweater, so no problem. So when I got to the neckline, I did that by hand. I think I can't believe I've already forgotten, but I think what I did was, oh yes, I sewed a line on my sewing machine of the neckline and then cut it, because what I had done was make a giant rectangle with the decreases for the raglan yoke area, and then the top was just like this, horizontal. So I cut my own neckline, what I thought would be good, and then I picked up stitches by hand and did the neck ribbing like that. And I did an I-cord bind off. That's my new favorite bind off because you don't have to worry about, I used to do the Italian bind off, and I don't like having to deal with the needles and you run out of yarn and you have to put more yarn on. But with the I-cord bind off, you just keep knitting from your skein of yarn and you don't have to worry about weaving in a bunch of ends of different yarn lengths, if you know what I mean. And then for the sleeve, I did another giant rectangle. Yes, I did. I started from the bottom and I did some amount of increases every whatever amount of rows the pattern says. And then when I got to the armpit area again, which was the widest part, then I started decreasing every single row. But again, I think I should have decreased every other row. And that type of shaping is not in the original pattern. Kristin's original pattern is a beautiful seamless yoke design, and I definitely want to make this again by hand because it just looks so beautiful to have a round yoke as opposed to this 90-degree angle yoke. I still think this is beautiful, but you can definitely see the benefits of doing something by hand. Also, this little section here is so beautiful. I hadn't done this in my last episode, but I did some accent colors here, and then this is just embroidery floss roses here. I think it's called a railway rose. And I think she had only done a couple right on the top of the sleeve, but I did a few more. I didn't go all the way around the full sleeve circumference because that's too much work, but I did most of the way around in the front. And then in the back, I just left that blank. So the yarn I used, I love so much. It's Hillesvag Ask. It's pretty much identical to Rauma Fino, if you've ever used that. It's a rustic, non-superwash Norwegian wool from the Norwegian white sheep, I believe. And this yarn is rustic, but so soft and fuzzy. And it's already starting to fuzz up nicely, as if you had knit with mohair. That's how fuzzy it's getting. And I just love it so much. This color is the Mørkbrun color. I think that means dark brown or maybe black brown. And then I used whatever white color they have. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this. It's also machine knitting. I don't know if anyone's interested in that anyways. But if you are, I knit this on the loosest possible tension on my machine. And I think this is about as thick of a yarn as my machine can take, especially when you're doing 2 strands at a time. So yeah, that's it. Okay, we're on to my 4th whip, almost nearly there. So this is a Halloween sweater I made for one of my girls. I just love little cutesy holiday patterns, and I just wanted to do this really badly this year. And I had the best idea ever, in my opinion, which is to knit the yoke by hand in Colorwork and then put the rest of the piece on the machine and finish off the plain stockinette in that way. And I love this method. I'm definitely going to do this again. So what I did was, so I made the yoke. Oh, sorry, the reason why I'm not showing you this in person right now is because my daughter wore it to preschool today. So I'm just gonna insert some footage instead, and hopefully that's okay. So what I did was I made my own Halloween pattern. I found a free kids yoke sweater in the gauge that I needed. And I just went on Stitch Fiddle and adjusted. I kept all the increases for the ratio of the increases to rows all the same, and just made my own pattern on some graph paper. It looks a little something like this. It's not too clear. If anyone's interested in this Halloween pattern, let me know and I will write it up on Stitch Fiddle nicely, and I will give that out for free to anyone who's interested. But anyways, I put some upside down bats, some pumpkins, and some black cats, which are all very Halloween inspired, but not spooky. I didn't want to do anything spooky for a small kid, like skulls or anything. And I think my girls really like this. I was supposed to make 2, but my other girl hasn't expressed interest. I think maybe she forgot, or maybe she doesn't care about it anymore, so I might not have to make the other one yet. Maybe I can do it next year. Although I do have the yarn for it, so maybe I will just do it anyways. We will see. So what I did for the yoke was I knitted in the round on 3.5mm needles, and then when I got to the armpit area, I put the front on the knitting machine and knit the rest of the front in plain stockinette. Then I did the back in the same way, and the sleeves as well. And when I finished, so first of all, I made an 8-year-old size, and I put it on my 6-year-old, she's pretty tall, and it didn't fit her at all, so now the sweater is now belonging to my 4-year-old. So just watch out for that in terms of the sizing on this pattern. I'll put the link to the free pattern below in case you're interested, and if you want me to write up that Halloween pattern in a stitch fiddle nicely and share it with you, just let me know, just leave me a comment. Anyways, the yarn I used was Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino. I really was interested in trying a blend of cotton and merino because one of my girls is a bit sensitive to wool. So I thought maybe if there's cotton in there, she won't find it itchy. And when she tried this on, even though it didn't fit, she didn't say it was itchy. So I think this was a big win. So these are the colors I chose. I think they're so beautiful together. This is Ballerina Pink. It's a very, very pale pink, definitely not too in your face and perfect for a background color. This one is called Burnt Orange. Not too orange, more of a sophisticated orange, maybe I would say. And then this is Licorice. This is just plain black. So that's pretty much all I have to say about the little Halloween sweater. Oh, I am also supposed to embroider eyeballs on the bat and the cat and little jack-o'-lantern face on the pumpkin, but I think they forgot about that and I'm not gonna have to do it, so that's great. Phew, okay, we're on to the last whip of the day. We made it. This is another machine knit. This is a giant shawl that I used with all scrap yarn. I just decided to cast on maybe 150 stitches on the knitting machine, and I had a lot of black and brown drops alpaca yarn in my stash, and I wanted something really cozy and warm. The weather is just starting to get a little cold, and I wanted something that I could just throw over my shoulders or just keep it on the couch for a little lap blanket whenever things were getting a little bit too chilly. And maybe I made this about 8 feet long. I'm not even sure how long this is, but there's this section here. These are 2 different other stash colors, black and a burnt orange type of yarn. And then I ran out of that and went into the drops alpaca, brown, black and brown colors. And the edges are definitely rolling, but I don't think I'm gonna fix that. It's way too big. But how did I make this? This is using the weaving setting on the knitting machine. So I've never tried that before. So the knitting machine can do plain stockinette. There's a mode where you do tuck and slip stitches. I don't even really know what that means yet. Then it can do Fair Isle, which is the punch card with 2 different colors. And then there's weaving. So I still don't really know what weaving is, but I suspect it has something to do with carrying one of the yarns in the back of the work. Usually on the knitting machine, the back of the work is facing you, but with weaving, all of the patterning is happening on the back side of the work, which is nice, so you can actually see what you're doing. So what I did for this, so for weaving you also use a punch card. So I just use this very simple 1x1 alternative row punch card. And the machine says you can use that one for the weaving technique, so that's what I did. And I just did a really simple pattern where I did like 30 rows of this, and then I held the pattern and did 1x1, and hold means you pause the punch card, and I did I think 8 or 10 rows of that, and then another 30 rows or another 10 rows of the punch card, and then I held the punch card, paused for another 30 rows. This might not make any sense to you, but I'm really happy with how this turned out. It's a totally usable piece of knitting, and I learned a lot in the process. With every project, I'm learning more and more on my knitting machine, and I think it looks really real. My husband said, "Wow, that looks real," and that is the best compliment you can get when you knit something, isn't it? So that's all the finished objects I have today. A lot of projects and 0 whips. So I don't know what I'm going to be working on next. I think what I'll probably do is, you know, the leftover yarn I have, the Hillesvag Luna. I think I'm going to make my husband a polar bear colorwork hat. I asked him what he wants next. I was going to make him slippers, but he says he doesn't want slippers. He wants mittens or a hat, and he likes cutesy animal patterns, so I'm going to do a polar bear hat. And the polar bears are going to be white, and then the background is going to be that gold ochre color. And I'm sure I have enough for that, but I should probably check also. So that's an upcoming whip, possibly. And then another big project that I have planned, I just got the yarn. I'm going to be making the Agnes kofte by Kristin Wiola, the same designer that I just showed you for the Around the Valley Setesdal inspired sweater. So this is from that ebook as well, which you can get online in English. And I saw Karine from the Woolly Thistle making this in Rama Fino, and it looks so amazing. The colors in it are just absolutely beautiful, total genius type of color combinations there. And so I went on Ravelry I like to check out all the projects, and I saw one person made this in a combination of knitting for olive merino and mohair held double. And I thought, after I made this, I really like mohair and I want another very soft sweater. Normally I work with a lot of non-superwash rustic wools that are not necessarily scratchy, but you know, they're not really merino soft or anything. So I thought I would love to have another very, very soft, snuggly colorwork sweater. So I'm going to be making that sweater in the merino and mohair held together. So I got that yarn in, and I'll just show you a couple of colors. So the main body of the sweater is going to be made out of the Knitting for Olive, merino in marzipan, and dark ochre. So you can see I just love that type of ochre, yellowish brown color. So I might be casting that on. Maybe it'll be in the next episode. Who knows? But thank you, if you stayed to the end, thank you so much for watching and joining me today. Nobody else in my family knits, so this is my knitting community, and thank you so much for your lovely comments and for being with me here today. I hope you're knitting on something that you love, and please subscribe if you'd like to see more episodes, and if you have time, give the video a thumbs up as well to help out my channel. Thanks again, and hope you have a great day. Bye!